This time on MotorWeek, the original hot hatchback is back. A literary legend talks cars, and a classic 4x4 keeps on trucking. So come drive with us next.
MotorWeek, television's automotive magazine. Your host for MotorWeek, John Davis.
Well, hello and welcome again to MotorWeek. We're glad to have you with us. There was a time in the 1980s when hot hatchbacks, high-performance versions of otherwise mundane econoboxes were all the rage. They were the true sporting hardware for car enthusiasts on a budget. And the king of the hot hatches was the Volkswagen GTI. First built on the Rabbit platform and then on the Golf, the GTI impressed our MotorWeek crew every time we got behind the wheel. And while most manufacturers have dropped these tiny performers from their line, Volkswagen's hung in there. They've built a new GTI based on this Golf 3. And boy, are we glad they did. It's been over a dozen years since VW invented the pocket rocket with the 1983 GTI. And while it was a performance car milestone, this 95 Volkswagen GTI VR6 has a lot more things going for it than the Rabbit-based GTIs ever did. To start with, 6 cylinders, 2 more than any previous GTI. And these 6 form VW's superb narrow-angle 2.8-liter VR6 engine. Dual overhead cams drive 24 valves to produce 172 horsepower and 173 pound-feet of torque. Impressive numbers. And gave us some equally impressive numbers at the track, like a scant 6.7 seconds from 0 to 60. There was good grunt off the line, too, as 85% of the engine's torque is available at only 2,000 RPM. The standard low-speed traction control system did a good job of controlling torque steer, a problem in GTIs of old. A close ratio 5-speed manual is the sole transmission available, but GTIs use cable shift linkage instead of the Golf's rod type, so the long throws feel a bit rubbery. Still, the well-matched drivetrain pulled our GTI through the quarter mile in a brief 15 seconds flat at 95 miles per hour. But it takes more than raw speed to successfully negotiate a road circuit, in our case, West Virginia's 2-mile-long Summit Point Raceway. There we found the front-wheel drive GTI to be very tossable, steerable by wheel and by throttle. Its 4-wheel independent suspension features a larger anti-roll bar up front and firmer gas shock valving all around. Although our test car wore good-sized 50 series tires, their harshness conspired with copious body roll for more side-slipping corners than expected. Still, the GTI was more fun to slice around Summit Point than some race-prepared cars we've tried. And they won't raise their inside tire in the traditional VW Salute either. Stopping on track or off is made easy thanks to huge 4-wheel disc brakes with standard anti-lock. They took our 2,800-pound GTI from 60 to 0 in a fine average of 117 feet. Stops were straight and sure with good pedal feel and no fade. Back on the street, our GTI was perfectly at home in everyday driving. Any lack of decorum on the track was made up for by a very commendable ride. EPA ratings are 18 city and 25 highway, with our test loop producing 22 on average. And our 67 decibel sound reading is very good for a performance car. To stock Golf 3 styling, the GTI adds fog lamps in the bumper, 2 rather than 3 grille slats, along with a bright VR6 logo, and a telltale swept-back radio antenna resides on the roof. Styling out back is also pure Golf, but GTI adds a window-mounted spoiler with center stop lamp, larger, darker tail lamps, and the name of the little missile that just passed you. Inside, you're greeted by brightly patterned cloth seats and a voluminous interior. This is still a great car for the Jolly Green Giant. Dash and interior trim are purposeful, not luxurious, and control placement is generally excellent. The only leather in a GTI covers the steering wheel, which in turn houses the driver's airbag. There's one for the passenger, too. Although not as complete as we'd like, the analog gauges are as clear as any we've seen. The sport bucket seats provide great support with a variety of manual adjustments, including VW's signature up and forward, down and back motion, and a tilt wheel to provide endless driving position. Standard seat heat is appreciated too. The CFC-free HVAC system works with only 3 large rotary knobs and a few oversized switches. And while those controlling the premium cassette stereo unit could be a bit larger, its 8 speakers provide great sound. A 6 CD changer is optional. Standard is a multifunction trip computer operated by a fingertip control. The remote hatch release hides inside a locking console storage compartment, adjacent to twin cup holders. The GTI's upright cabin means lots of rear seat headroom too. A cup holder here pops out from the rear console. Practicality is well served by the 60-40 split bench, which folds in sections or entirely to form a flat cargo area of 41 cubic feet. The easy opening hatchback provides 17.5 cubic feet of covered storage when the rear seat is in use. Leaving the GTI is a unique experience thanks to the central locking system's convenience close feature with the power windows and the glass sunroof. GTI safety includes dual airbags, anti-lock brakes, traction control, and 5-mile-per-hour bumpers. And though 2-door GTIs have anti-intrusion side door beams, they don't quite meet the Fed's 1997 standards like the 4-door Golfs do. And the tab for all this performance, practicality, safety, and fun? $18,875. And that was the sticker on our test GTI too. Options are limited to clear coat paint and a CD player. So in these days of pricey performance, the GTI certainly qualifies as a bargain. But the GTI is much more. It's the final signal that Volkswagen is back in the groove with a clear vision of a future that begins in the past. You know, proper car care is always important, but some vehicles require more care than others. No one knows that better than our own Pat Goss.
John, one of the fastest growing segments of the automobile industry are the sport utilities. And most sport utility vehicles are also equipped with 4-wheel drive. And depending on how you use that vehicle, well, there's certain things that you should be checking on a regular basis to avoid costly repairs. The first thing, if you ever drive it in salt, snow, or in water, maybe you get it out on the beach and you get it in salt water, anything at all where the water gets up close to the differentials in it, then you want to check the condition of the fluid in the front and the rear differential and also in the transfer case. Sometimes water can migrate into those areas. You'll see this as a milky condition in that fluid. Use what your owner's manual recommends for the proper type of gear lubricant. Also, after anything like that, lubricate all of the grease fittings in the front end because most of these fittings are not watertight and water can get in there. When you grease them, it pushes the water out and protects the tie rod ends and all of these other parts. Again, use the proper lubrication. Also, flush the brake system. Get fresh brake fluid in it at least once a year. Now, that's good advice for any vehicle, but especially on a 4-wheel drive. And you know how 4-wheel drives, many times when you're out on the highway with them, how they have kind of a jiggly feel to the front end? Well, you can do away with that, like I did on this one, by installing a steering stabilizer. And no, they're not just for off-road use. Makes an amazing difference in the way the car drives on the highway. Also, pull the wheels off of the vehicle periodically. When you do, you want to put some grease on the inside of the hub because many times salt and water and so on will cause the wheels to corrode, which damages the wheels. It also makes them just like weld themselves to the vehicle itself. While you're doing that, have the brake calipers checked and lubricate the calipers because, again, many times the calipers will become corroded. Now, here's something where you can really save yourself a lot of dollars. The wheel bearings on many of these vehicles, the front wheel bearings, have to be packed periodically. But there's a trick. See, all of this stuff has to come off to pack the wheel bearings. We've even gone a step further. We have taken the spindle off of this one. And lo and behold, in the back side of this spindle on many of these vehicles is what we see here. A very small bearing, which is many times overlooked. If you fail to take care of this one, it can lead to much pain and suffering as the vehicle gets older. If you have a question or a comment about your four-wheel drive or any other vehicle for that matter, write to me. If I use your letter, I'll send you a MotorWeek t-shirt. The address? MotorWeek, Owings Mills, Maryland, 21117.
Our car of the week is definitely one that you won't see every day. It's a very rare 1970 Seata Spring, and it's owned by Ed Heinman of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Submit your car of the week photos to MotorWeek, Owings Mills, Maryland, 21117. Many writers of adventure novels never get any closer to the action than their computers. But when Craig Singhaus recently met author and noted car collector Clive Cussler out on the high road, he soon realized that he had found a definite exception to the rule.
For Clive Cussler, best-selling author of such titles as Raise the Titanic and Sahara, research goes well beyond the library. Cussler's fictional swashbuckling hero, Dirk Pitt, is an avid collector of exquisite classic cars, and details of his automobiles appear throughout the 11 Dirk Pitt novels. Automobiles owned by Cussler himself. This is the car that was featured in the book Sahara, right?
Yes, it's an Avions Voisin. Dirk Pitt and his buddy Al Giardino drove this across the desert in Sahara. And the neat thing is, at the end of the book, Dirk always gets to keep the car and take it home.
What a great arrangement.
I think the styling and the engineering that appeals to me on a classic car of the 20s, 30s, they really are mechanical masterpieces of art. The one-off coachwork particularly. And to me, it's like a Rembrandt painting. And they're cars that will never be repeated. When you see a car like that, you'll never see another one ever built in 1,000 years, perhaps.
Now, this is the Stutz that in the book Dragon, Dirk Pitt chases after the bad guys in the limousine, right?
That's true, and it's really not that far-fetched because he could keep up on the straightaways because this had a lot of torque and a 4-speed transmission, and I know he could corner with a limousine.
So in its day, this is quite a performance car, then.
Oh, Stutz was really marvelous.
In addition to his collection of pre-war and European classics, Clive Cussler also harbors an affinity for fins.
My interest in the American cars, particularly in the late 50s, we'll say, is because of the fact they were such big barges, they were chrome, they had 350 or whatever horsepower engines, they were huge, they were boxy, and there again, it's an era we'll never see. These are the last of them. It's just a mechanical and a design era that is lost and gone forever.
So even though Clive seeks to preserve these pieces of history, don't expect them to be locked away from the lure of the high road.
They were meant to be driven. That was the whole idea. You build an automobile to drive. I've never really looked at the cars as an investment. Oh, I went overboard in a lot of it, but I don't care. I just love old cars.
Here at MotorWeek, we subscribe to the philosophy that you can never get too much of a good thing. So back now to more about the latest cars. Here's Lisa Barrow with Motor News.
In the news this week is Toyota's redesign of its compact pickup, now known as the Tacoma. California designed and built, Tacomas will come with 2- or 4-wheel drive in regular and extra cab versions. Toyota provides ample standard power with a pair of dual overhead cam 16-valve 4-cylinder engines. A 142 horsepower 2.4-liter unit is standard on 2-wheel drive models, while 4x4s get a 150 horsepower 2.7-liter. Optional on both is this 3.4-liter V6 with 190 horsepower from the larger T100 pickup. 4x4 Tacomas have more aggressive front fascia and fenders than 2-wheel drive models. All Tacomas sport a driver's airbag, a new coil spring double wishbone front suspension, and rack and pinion steering. Not surprisingly, the new Tacomas ride smoother, corner better, and are much quieter than the pickups they replace. Toyota sells more compact 4x4 pickups than anyone else, and they aim to keep it that way. Shift-on-the-fly capability is now possible via an optional one-touch high-force switch on the extra cab SR5 V6. Standard towing capacity for all V6 models increases from 3,500 to 5,000 pounds, while V6 payloads reach as high as 1,860 pounds. Brakes are front discs, rear drums. A four-wheel anti-lock system is optional on all models. Toyota debuts the Tacoma at this week's Chicago Auto Show, and they should be on sale by mid-March. Prices should rise about 5% and range from $10,500 for the two-wheel drive regular cab to $21,000 for the four-wheel drive SR5 V6 extra cab. And that's it for this week's Motor News.
Sport utility vehicles are very popular these days. But ask anyone who's bought one recently and they'll also tell you they're very expensive. But take heart, there are still some bargains in the 4x4 market, and one's a classic design from the company that started it all. It's the Jeep Cherokee. No, not the Grand Cherokee, but the original four-door compact sport utility, Cherokee. This daddy of today's hottest trucking trend has changed little in appearance since its debut in the fall of 1983. And while it hardly carries the somewhat more aerodynamic lines of its successor, time has not stood completely still for the good old Cherokee. But its mechanical changes have had a profound impact on the evolution of the old rough and ready 4x4 into today's more modern sport utility. Mechanical changes for 1995 are less significant than those of previous years, but when one hops behind the steering wheel, they'll notice a big change. That wheel is now home for an airbag, making the Cherokee as well set up with safety equipment as some of its newest competitors. Otherwise, the Cherokee's flat dash hasn't been altered much since our 1987 test. It's just a bit neater now with less of the 80s imitation chrome trim. And while the gauges aren't as slick as those of some newer sport utes, they're still large and comprehensive. But just about every other current 4x4's cockpit is larger than that of the Cherokee. The seats may not look fancy, though you can order leather, and they're firm and supportive. A comfortable rear seat is never out of style, and the Cherokee just qualifies. The seat back doesn't split, but it does fold completely flat. So the standard cargo space of 35.7 cubic feet nearly doubles to 71.8 with the seat down. While the standard spare tire mounts inside, an outside hanger is optional. Every top-line sport utility has a V6 under the hood nowadays, but in our Cherokee Sport, it's an inline 6. Jeep's near-legendary engine displaces 4 liters, making 190 horsepower and 224 pound-feet of torque. So Cherokee horsepower beats the Ford Explorer by almost 20%. Our Sport pumped power through an optional 4-speed automatic, and Jeep's standard command track shift on the fly part-time 4-wheel drive system. In 2-wheel drive, it romped from 0 to 60 in only 8.9 seconds, and a quarter mile of 16.8 seconds at 82 miles per hour. The Cherokee remains one of the fastest in its class. And it also tackled our slalom course with the same level of competence and actually quicker maneuverability than some more sophisticated designs. On the open road, the Cherokee lacks some of the ride comfort of modern sport utes. There's still a lot of jostling from side to side. But off-road, Cherokee roughs it with the best of them. Coil springs in the front and leaf springs in the rear, combined with very quick steering to make the Cherokee a good companion in tight spaces. And what you may sacrifice in refinement for the Cherokee, you'll make up for in price. The Cherokee 4-wheel drive line begins at only $15,215 for the 2-door SE. Step up to a 4-door 4-wheel drive Sport, and you'll shell out a still reasonable $18,606. Our well-optioned test vehicle drove away for $23,943, or about where competitive 4x4 prices start. So if you're eager to join the sport utility ranks, but your bank book makes you hesitant, the Jeep Cherokee may be the perfect choice. It's an oldie, but a goodie. It's easy to pick out the really hardcore enthusiasts at an auto show. They're the ones that never leave the Ferrari stand. They're also the ones that keep calling and writing to us asking for more tests of the cars from Maranello. And believe me, we'd love to oblige, but there are only so many Ferrari models to test. So while we wait for the next ones, we'll have to settle for one more look at our last Ferrari experience in this week's Road Test by Request. Don't let their color fool you. These two latest Ferraris, both variations on the 348, are as red-blooded as any machine that ever came from Maranello. The coupe is the limited edition 348 Speciale. But the most significant of the two is this one, the 348 Spider. It's Ferrari's first two-seat convertible since the Daytona Spider of 1973. But unlike the Daytona, the 348 carries its engine amidships, which makes turning it into a convertible a tricky affair. Our congratulations then to Ferrari's engineers. The manual top that they designed does a fine job of mimicking the standard hardtops lines. It's also the most efficient convertible top that Ferrari has ever produced, folding easily and storing neatly beneath a soft tonneau cover. But the Spider is more than a 348 with the top chopped off. Cosmetic changes include body-colored lower trim panels, while mechanical ones are a stiffened chassis, revised suspension settings, and a wider rear track. Like the Spider's driver, the engine now gets more air, thanks to less restrictive intake and exhaust system. Horsepower stands at 312 and torque is unchanged at 229 pound-feet. Better breathing also means a more authentic Ferrari exhaust note than the standard 300 horsepower 348. The Spider has also adopted the 348 TB's transverse gearbox, but with revised ratios for improved acceleration. The shifter remains gated and Ferrari firm. But test drivers with strong right arms still pulled a 0 to 60 time of 5.8 seconds from the Spider. A quarter mile took 14.2 seconds at 101 miles per hour, thanks to the massive torque and mile-wide power band. The 348 Spider stops as well as it goes, averaging a stable 101 feet from 60, thanks to its 4 anti-lock equipped discs. And as with the shifter, some serious muscle is required. Ferraris are not cars for people with weak legs or weak shoulders. Our drivers needed all of their strength to wrestle the Spider's massive cornering abilities through the heavy manual steering and onto the asphalt. There is convertible body flex, but not very much, thanks to the 348 Scout chassis design. That's rare in even the most expensive convertibles. And the 348 Spider is certainly one of those with a price tag of $122,000. Out on the road, the Spider's highway ride remains as firm as that of a standard 348, but the new suspension settings and wider rear track mean a more stable feel. And minimal wind intrusion with the top down means a very pleasant driving experience. Interior design doesn't vary from that of the standard 348. It's one of Ferrari's best efforts ever. We'd add a bit more travel to the tilt wheel and a few more gauges to the main cluster, but the orange on black analog dials are very easy to read. Oil and fuel gauges live down below in the center dash. Seating is exotic car firm, and the unusual floor-mounted motorized seatbelts take a bit of getting used to, but the driving position is Ferrari's best to date. The low center console houses comprehensive climate controls, while up top there's a hidden compartment for the stereo of your choice. Since the trunk is up front and the spare tire is just a can of tire sealer, the convertible top has no effect on luggage space. Even if it did, the enjoyment of driving Ferrari's superb 348 Spider would still be undiminished. The 348 is, after all, a pure driving machine, and the addition of the Spider's open-air cockpit makes it one of the most enjoyable exotics ever. If you simply must have a solid top, however, but still want something unique by Ferrari standards, that is, there is the very limited edition 348 Speciale. Only 100 of these more muscular 348 coupes have been built and sold, each with a price of $112,000. Like the Spider, the Speciale gets full body color trim, but a slightly different taillight treatment, and carbon fiber racing seats straight out of the legendary F40. It's a lot of work to get into them, but they hold you in place through hell or high water. Mechanicals in both cars are identical, from the suspension to the 312 horsepower engine. And both our cars produced identical performance in a straight line. But the coupe's stiffer body means less front plow, making the car more nimble in corners. Our staff all thought that the Speciale was a more handsome car than the standard 348, and lamented the fact that so few were built. You have one of these, you're a very lucky person indeed. Of course, the same thing could be said about the 348 Spider, or any Ferrari for that matter. As we finished our stint with our magnificent screaming yellow pair, we felt rejuvenated. Perhaps more than any other reason, because they do wear the prancing horse. And whether we drive one Ferrari or a whole herd, the pleasure is almost immeasurable. If we'd done it ourselves, we could not have given Race Car Flashback a better title. This collection of vintage motorsports articles from the pages of Old Cars Weekly is a real blast from the past. Assembled by editor John Cannell, it covers the evolution of American motorsports from 1900 to 1980. Its softback format and black and white photos aren't fancy, but hardcore race fans with an eye for history will enjoy its look back at the golden days of speed. Be sure to join us next week for more MotorWeek and our annual Driver's Choice Awards. We'll also put Ford's latest Explorer through its paces, as well as drive Hyundai's economical new Accent. Pat Goss will show us how to remove dents but not paint, and we'll also have all the latest motor news. I'm John Davis. We'll see you then.
To order a video cassette of this program, call 1-800-422-0064 or send $29.95 plus $4 shipping and handling to this address.